March 24, 1999. 2 o'clock hours. Somewhere over the dark, jagged peaks of the Balkans, the air is thin and bitterly cold. Below, the Serbian Air Defense Network, a sophisticated web of Soviet-made SA-3 and SA-6 missile batteries, is fully energized. The radar operators are on high alert, their eyes strained against the flickering green phosphor of their scopes. They are seasoned professionals who have spent years studying the signatures of NATO fighters. They know exactly what a strike looks like on radar, a bright, undeniable bloom of light, a pulse of energy that screams, "Here I am." But tonight, the screens are as quiet as a graveyard. There is no interference, no jamming, no indication that the sky holds anything more than the occasional stray bird or a gust of wind. Inside the cockpit of the Spirit of Mississippi, Major Chris "Shadow" Hahn feels a sensation that no other pilot in human history has ever truly known, the sensation of being a ghost. There is no roar of the engines, only a muffled, subterranean hum that sounds more like a cooling fan than a powerhouse of 4 General Electric F-118 turbofans. There is no vibration in the stick. The cockpit is bathed in a soft, indigo light, reflecting off the complex composite surfaces of the instrument panel. Ahead of him, the flying wing cuts through the night with a grace that defies every law of aerodynamics ever written in a textbook. Hahn glances at his low observable health display. According to the sensors, to the world beneath him, he doesn't exist. You see, the irony of the B-2 Spirit is almost too heavy to grasp. This is an aircraft with a 172-foot wingspan. It is a massive black diamond of a machine that weighs 336,000 pounds when fully loaded. By all the rules of physics, it should be the most visible object in the sky. It should be a beacon that lights up every radar from Budapest to Belgrade. And yet, here it is, 50 miles from the most heavily defended airspace in Eastern Europe. And the Serbian operators are currently checking their equipment for malfunctions because they can't believe the sky is this empty. They are looking for a door to be kicked down, not realizing the intruder is already standing in the middle of their living room. Major Hahn adjusts his oxygen mask. He is 30,000 feet above the earth. But he feels like he is underwater, floating in a lightless abyss where the only reality is the digital feedback of his screens. He knows that in 5 minutes, he will release 16 2,000-pound satellite-guided bombs onto a key command and control center. He knows that the first time the enemy will realize he is there is when the ground beneath their feet becomes liquid. This is the first border crossing of a new era. It is the moment when the Iron Curtain of radar, built over 50 years at the cost of trillions of rubles and dollars, was rendered obsolete in a single, silent heartbeat. What Hahn is experiencing is the ultimate expression of American ingenuity. It is the realization that the most effective way to win a fight is to ensure the enemy never knows the fight has started. For decades, the world believed that border security meant building a wall of sensors that could catch anything with a metal skin. They thought they had built a cage for the American eagle. But the B-2 isn't an eagle, it's a shadow. It is the realization that if you can't see the blade, you can't stop the strike. As the B-2 Spirit crosses the invisible line into sovereign airspace, the pullback into the larger meaning becomes clear. This wasn't just a military mission, it was a geopolitical earthquake. It signaled the end of the detectable war. For the first time since the invention of the radar in 1935, the defender was no longer the master of his own territory. The sky had been reclaimed by the ghost, and the world was about to realize that the era of walls was officially dead. The silence in that Serbian radar van wasn't peace, it was the sound of an entire philosophy of warfare collapsing into the dark. To understand the birth of the B-2 Spirit, we have to go back to a time when American generals were faced with a terrifying, mathematical reality. By the late 1960s, the golden age of the B-52 Stratofortress was coming to a bloody end. In the skies over North Vietnam, the world watched as Soviet-made SA-2 guideline missiles began swatting our most powerful bombers out of the air like clumsy insects. The message was clear: speed and altitude were no longer enough. The Soviets were building a wall of echoes, an integrated, multi-layered air defense system that could track a baseball from 200 miles away. If World War III were to break out, the Strategic Air Command faced a grim calculation. We might lose 70% of our bomber fleet before they even reached their first targets. The problem no one wanted to solve was the very nature of flight itself. For 50 years, the recipe for a plane was simple: a tube for the fuselage, wings for lift, and a big vertical tail for stability. But that recipe was a disaster for radar. You see, a vertical tail is essentially a giant corner reflector. When a radar pulse hits it, the energy doesn't scatter, it bounces right back to the sender, screaming the plane's location to everyone within 100 miles. Every rivet, every cockpit seam, every landing gear door was a hot spot that glowed on a Soviet scope. The Air Force was stuck in a visibility trap. To build a bomber big enough to carry the necessary payload to Russia, you had to build a plane so large it was impossible to hide. But in the dust-choked hangars of California, a man named Jack Northrop had been nursing a heretical dream since the 1940s. He believed that the tail was a mistake. He envisioned the flying wing, a shape so pure, so aerodynamically efficient, that it would slice through the air with zero wasted drag. He built the YB-35 and the jet-powered YB-49, but they were machines ahead of their time. Without computers to help keep them stable, they were notoriously difficult to fly. One crashed, killing a legendary test pilot named Glenn Edwards. The project was scrapped, and the military establishment laughed off the flying wing as a dangerous obsession. They called it Northrop's folly. The doubt among the Pentagon's high command was thick enough to cut with a knife. When the first whispers of stealth technology, then known as low observables, started circulating in the mid-1970s, the old guard generals were deeply skeptical. They looked at the physics and said it was impossible. Radar, they argued, was like a high-powered flashlight in a dark gymnasium. How do you hide a 300,000-pound object from a flashlight? They believed that the only way to survive was to fly faster, like the State Route 71, or lower, like the B-1. The idea of a slow, massive bomber that simply disappeared was considered science fiction, a waste of billions of taxpayer dollars on a ghost hunt. What they didn't know, what the secret engineers at Northrop and Lockheed were starting to realize, was that radar isn't sight. It's a game of echoes. If you could shape a plane so that it never reflected energy back to the source, but instead scattered it into the empty reaches of space, the flashlight would never find its target. This required a level of mathematical precision that the human brain couldn't handle. It required the invention of supercomputers capable of calculating the radar cross-section of every single curve on a 170-foot wing. In the Damdao style, we might pause here to ask, why did no one else solve this? The truth is, the Soviets actually discovered the math first. A Russian scientist named Pyotr Ufimtsev published a paper in 1962 proving that radar waves could be reflected away from a receiver by a flat surface. But the Soviet military establishment ignored him. They were so focused on building bigger radars and faster missiles that they didn't see the mini revelation right in front of them. The best defense against a radar is to make the radar irrelevant. America, however, had something the Soviets didn't: a desperate need to find a way through the Iron Curtain without starting a nuclear apocalypse. We had the Northrop engineers who refused to let Jack Northrop's dream die. And we had the industrial audacity to gamble on a shape that looked like it couldn't even fly. They called it the Advanced Technology Bomber, or ATB. But to the few men in the black programs who knew the truth, it was something else entirely. It was the Invisibility Project. It was the attempt to build a blade that the hand could hold, but the eye could never find. The creation of the B-2 Spirit was less of a manufacturing process and more of a 10-year scientific seance. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, behind the high-security perimeter of Northrop's Plant 42 in Palmdale, California, a group of graybeard engineers were attempting to do something that had never been done. They were trying to build a shape that existed more in the mathematical world than the physical one. While the rest of the Air Force was focused on the F-117 Nighthawk, which looked like a crumpled piece of black paper because computers back then could only calculate radar reflections of flat surfaces, the B-2 team wanted more. They wanted the holy grail of aerodynamics, a smooth, organic, continuously curved flying wing. The engineering revelation of the B-2 lay in a single revolutionary concept: the unified structure. In a normal plane, you have parts that do different things. The engines provide thrust, the wings provide lift, the skin covers the frame. In the B-2, every single molecule had to do everything at once. The skin wasn't just a covering. It was a complex composite sandwich, made of carbon graphite and epoxy that was stronger than steel but lighter than aluminum. More importantly, it was infused with iron ball paint, a radar-absorbent material, RAM, containing tiny, microscopic ferrite spheres. When a radar wave hits the B-2, it doesn't bounce off, it gets trapped in the magnetic matrix of the skin and turned into heat. The B-2 literally eats the enemy's radar energy. But the real magic, the Damdao secret, was how they solved the problem of the missing tail. You see, a flying wing is inherently unstable. Without a vertical fin to keep it pointed straight, it wants to tumble and spin like a fallen leaf in a breeze. To fix this, American engineers didn't build a tail, they built a brain. The B-2 uses a quadruple redundant fly-by-wire system. A computer monitors the plane's position 40 times every second. Before a human pilot could even feel the plane start to slip. The computer has already made 1,000 tiny adjustments to the split flap rudders on the wingtips. The B-2 doesn't fly through the air, it is calculated through the air. What most people don't know, an engineer once whispered during the secret testing, is that we didn't just hide the plane from radar. We hid it from the heat. Think about it, a jet engine is a literal flamethrower. To a heat-seeking missile, IR, a B-2 should look like a bonfire in a dark alley. To solve this, the engineers did something brilliant. They buried the engines deep inside the wing and curved the intake ducts so that the spinning fan blades, the brightest part of a jet on radar, were never visible from the front or the back. Then, they mixed the hot exhaust with cool air from the atmosphere and vented it out over the top of the wing through V-shaped troughs lined with heat-absorbing tiles. By the time the exhaust leaves the plane, it's cooler than the air around it. The B-2 is a ghost to his eyes, and a shadow to his radar. The level of secret development was so intense that for years, the thousands of workers building the B-2 across 46 different states didn't even know what they were making. They were told they were building advanced satellite parts or high-end racing equipment. The truth was only revealed in 1988, when the Spirit of Missouri was finally rolled out of the hangar. The world gasped. It didn't look like an American weapon, it looked like something that had fallen from a higher civilization. It was a shape with no straight lines, no windows that a man could easily see into, and no clear way to tell where the machine ended and the air began. This was the turn of the century revelation. The B-2 wasn't just a better bomber, it was the end of the detectable era. It was the proof that American industry could coordinate 1,000,000 different parts from 1,000 different companies to create a single, unified system of silence. They had spent $22 billion, nearly $1 billion per plane, not for speed and not for armor. They spent it for the right to be invisible. They understood that in the modern age, the most expensive thing you can buy is the ability to be forgotten by the enemy's sensors. As the first B-2 took to the sky over the Mojave, the engineers didn't cheer, they exhaled. They knew that the Iron Curtain was now nothing more than a curtain. The wall of echoes had been breached by a machine that didn't leave an echo. The radar was dead, it just didn't know it yet. March 1999. In the underground bunkers of the Serbian High Command, the mood is one of defiant confidence. They have watched the American military deployments for weeks. They have studied the air tasking orders. They know that for the Americans to hit Belgrade, they must use bases in Italy, Germany, or the United Kingdom. They have scouts at the ends of the runways in Aviano and Mildenhall, radioing back every time a fighter takes off. Their integrated air defense system is fully webbed, a dense thicket of long-range search radars and short-range tracking sensors. They are waiting for the strike packages, the loud, messy clusters of F-16s and F-15s protected by jamming aircraft. They are ready to fight the visible war. What they don't know is that 2,000 miles away, in the quiet cornfields of Missouri, two men have just finished a cup of coffee and stepped into a cockpit that looks more like a starship than a plane. This is the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base. Their mission is a 31-hour round trip, 15 hours to the target, 30 minutes of combat, and another 15 hours home. This was the Ghost Trial. For the first time in the history of warfare, a nation was launching a strategic strike from its own backyard into an active, high-threat battlefield on another continent. As the Spirit of Indiana crosses the Atlantic, the two-man crew is living a surreal existence. In the back of the cockpit, behind the two ejection seats, there is a small space about the size of a walk-in closet. One pilot sleeps in a fold-out lawn chair, while the other monitors the low observable health of the aircraft. By the time they reach Serbian airspace, they are exhausted, but the machine is just getting started. As they cross the border, the B-2's DAS, the Defensive Management System, begins to register the enemy's radar activity. On the screen, it looks like a field of glowing bubbles. These are the detection ranges of the Serbian SAM sites. The B-2 doesn't try to jam them. It simply uses its onboard computers to calculate a flight path that slips between the bubbles, like a thread through a needle. You see, a veteran B-2 pilot would later explain, the enemy is looking for a signature that looks like a car. We're giving them a signature that looks like a large dragonfly. On that first night of Operation Allied Force, the Serbian radar operators were watching their screens with high intensity. They saw nothing.
No blips. No interference.
Then, at exactly 3 o'clock hours, the B-2 opened its massive bomb bay doors. For a fraction of a second, the stealth seal was broken, and the radar return spiked. But by the time the Serbian operator could even shout a warning, 16 2,000-pound JDM satellite-guided bombs had been released. The doors snapped shut, and the B-2 vanished from the scope before they could even lock a missile. The enemy's realization came not from their radars, but from their eyes. In Belgrade, the sky was silent. No roar of engines, no scream of incoming jets. Then suddenly, 16 different strategic targets, command centers, power stations, and air defense nodes, all exploded at once. It wasn't a carpet bombing. It was a surgical amputation. The Serbian commanders realized with a cold, sinking horror that their iron wall was useless. It wasn't just that they couldn't hit the B-2, it was that they couldn't even prove it had been there. They were fighting a war against the vacuum of the sky. The irony was devastating. The Serbs had some of the most aggressive, well-trained SAM operators in the world. They were giant slayers who were waiting for the American Goliath to show up. But the Goliath that showed up was invisible. The first time the world truly realized that radar was dead was that morning in 1999. When the most heavily defended capital in Europe was pummeled by a plane that never officially entered its airspace according to the sensors. When the two pilots finally landed back at Whiteman 31 hours later. They stepped out into the Missouri sunshine as if they had just been on a long drive. But they had just changed the nature of global power. They had proven that the B-2 wasn't just a plane, it was a global sniper. It had the weight of a sledgehammer but the precision of a scalpel. And the enemy's realization was total: if the Americans can do this from Missouri, they can do it from anywhere. The B-2 Ghost had crossed more than just a border, it had crossed the line between the detectable past and the invisible future. To understand the sheer magnitude of American industrial dominance, you have to look past the cockpit of the B-2 and into the hangars of Whiteman Air Force Base. This is where the systemic edge of the United States is truly forged. For over 30 years, the B-2 Spirit has remained the only stealth flying wing bomber in operational service on the planet. Think about that for a moment. In an age where smartphone technology cycles every 12 months and high-tech secrets are stolen in heartbeats, no other nation, not Russia, not China, not the European Union, has been able to replicate the B-2. It remains a class of one. This isn't just about a good design, it is about an industrial ecosystem that is so advanced, it borders on the mythological. The strategic edge of the B-2 starts with something as simple and as complex as a scratch. You see, a B-2 is only a ghost if its skin is perfect. The maintenance required to keep 20 of these aircraft combat-ready is a feat of logistics that would bankrupt most nations. Every hour the Spirit spends in the air requires dozens of hours of skin care on the ground. A specialized team of maintainers, the hidden heroes of stealth, must meticulously inspect every inch of the airframe. If a single panel has a gap larger than a few millimeters, or if there is a tiny nick in the radar absorbent tape that covers the seams, the plane's radar signature could bloom from the size of a bird to the size of a barn door. What people don't realize, a senior crew chief once remarked, is that we aren't just maintaining a plane. We're maintaining a vacuum. To do this, America had to build a global infrastructure of deployable hangars, the B-2 shelter system. These are massive, climate-controlled clamshell tents that can be flown to places like Guam or Diego Garcia to ensure the B-2's sensitive skin doesn't melt in the tropical humidity. This is the systemic dominance that the adversary can't copy. You can steal the blueprints for the wing, but you can't steal the 40 years of chemical engineering that created the tape and seal or the 100,000 person logistics chain that keeps the clamshells running in a remote corner of the Indian Ocean. In the Dam Dow style, we must appreciate the irony of the expensive piece. The B-2 is the most expensive aircraft ever built, costing over $2 billion per unit. Critics often call it a gold-plated luxury. But the truth is, the B-2 is the ultimate deterrence machine. Its real value isn't in what it destroys, but in what it prevents. Because the adversary knows that the B-2 can reach any target on Earth, through any defense, without being seen. They are forced to spend trillions of dollars on defensive systems that might never work. The B-2 forces the enemy into a visibility tax. They have to build more radars, more missiles, and more bunkers just to have a chance of surviving a strike from a plane they can't find. Furthermore, the B-2 is the only aircraft in the world capable of carrying the big stick, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, MOP. This is a 30,000-pound, GPS-guided bunker buster, designed to penetrate 60 feet of reinforced concrete. By combining stealth with the MOP, America sent a message to every dictator on the planet: there is no mountain deep enough, and no bunker thick enough, to hide from the Spirit. This isn't just a military capability, it is a strategic edge that changes the psychology of leadership. If you can't see the blade, you can't stop the strike, and if you can't hide from the strike, you can't win the war. The B-2 Spirit is the queen on the global chessboard. It moves in any direction, it can jump across continents in a single turn, and it can terminate any piece on the board without warning. The fact that the United States has maintained this queen since 1989, while the rest of the world is still trying to figure out how to build a knight, is the ultimate proof of American industrial inevitability. We didn't just build a better plane. We built a capability that remains untouchable because it is supported by a nation that refuses to accept the limitations of the possible. They thought the B-2 was a relic of the Cold War. The truth? It was the bridge to the future. Every time a B-2 takes off from Missouri, it isn't just carrying bombs. It is carrying 30 years of American engineering dominance that the rest of the world is still watching on their empty radar screens. It is the realization that in the game of shadows, America is the only one who truly knows how to turn off the lights. As the years turn into decades, the B-2 spirit has become something more than a weapon. It has become a ghost of the American mind. Its legacy is written in the silence of every battlefield it has touched, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the deserts of Libya. But its true aftermath isn't measured in craters or wreckage. It is measured in the quiet, desperate realization from our adversaries that the age of the border is over. Because of the B-2, a nation can no longer draw a line on a map and say, "Inside here, we are safe." The wall of echoes has been replaced by a void of certainty. In 1980, a year before he died, Jack Northrop, the man who had spent his life chasing the dream of the flying wing, was brought into a secure room under high guard. He was blind and could no longer speak, but the people in the black program wanted him to know. They handed him a small, precise scale model of what would become the B-2. He ran his hands along the smooth, curved surfaces, his fingers feeling the absence of a tail, the seamless transition of the wing into the body. A tear rolled down his cheek. He wrote on a pad, for the first time since his stroke, "Now I know why God has kept me alive for 25 years. He understood that his dream hadn't just been validated, it had been weaponized to preserve the very civilization that had once doubted him. This is the philosophical truth of the B-2, it is the survival of the just. There are those who argue that stealth is a cowardly way to fight, that it lacks the honor of the visible dogfight. But America understands a deeper truth: aerodynamics lets you fly. Stealth lets you survive. And the man who survives gets to come home. We didn't build the B-2 to be fair. We built it to be inevitable. We built it so that when the call of history comes, our sons and daughters can cross the most dangerous borders on Earth, do the impossible, and return to their families while the enemy is still looking at empty screens. The B-2 was the pioneer of the invisible, and its DNA now lives in every aspect of modern American power. It was the father of the F-22, the grandfather of the F-35, and the spiritual guide for the upcoming B-21 Raider. It taught us that in the digital age, information is the only true armor. By denying the enemy the information of our presence, we have fundamentally changed the psychology of conflict. The most terrifying thing for a tyrant isn't the plane he can see. It is the plane he suspects is already there, circling over his head, waiting for the order that has already been given. As we look toward the future, the shadow of the spirit continues to grow. The B-2 is 30 years old, yet it remains so far ahead of its time that we are still learning the full extent of its lessons. It stands as a testament to what a free people can achieve when they refuse to accept the limitations of the possible. It is the ultimate expression of American ingenuity, the realization that we don't just participate in the arms race, we redefine the track. We don't just build faster missiles or bigger radars. We build things that make missiles and radars look like bows and arrows. The truth is, the B-2 spirit didn't just cross a border in 1999. It crossed the threshold of history. It marked the moment America decided that we would no longer be victims of geography or prisoners of the visible world. We chose to own the silence. We chose to master the shadows. And in doing so, we ensured that the light of freedom would never be extinguished by a wall ever again. In the silence after the last bomb hit in Belgrade, even the enemy's radar was quiet. Not because it was off. Because there was nothing left to track. The era of the radar was dead, and the era of the ghost had begun. It wasn't luck. It was physics, precision, and 300 million people who refused to lose. The blade was invisible, but the strike was real.